We're back for more mini set card reviews. We got a fancy new legendary here behind me. We got some Demon Hunter cards revealed by Pizza and some Warrior cards revealed by Telso. So lots to talk about today. Let's kick it off though here with the Replicator-inator. This is 5 mana, 5/5 neutral mech legendary. It's got miniaturize and gigantify, which is fun. So you're going to get a 1/1 copy of this and an 8/8 copy of this. And each of them have the text, after you play a minion with the same attack as this, summon a copy of it. So of course, the ability here to build some boards and potentially build some value out of your replicators at various stages. So I guess we'll go through these kind of one by one. The base version, the 5/5 version, I do think it's going to be pretty hard to realize a lot of upside on this one. Number one, you're probably going to want to just like get it down as soon as possible on curve in many cases. Of course, you're playing this on 5. Unlikely to have something that can go alongside it immediately. There are some like discountable 5 attack things like Mantle Shaper. I don't have that one pulled up, but you know, there's some cards that can kind of go down and spike with it, but I think that's unlikely. There's also just some like really good, you know, you've got like Titans at 5 attack that you could copy with this, but as you'll see, 6 cost card, hard to play alongside a 5 cost card, even late in the game. So will this stick around for a turn into turn 6? Unlikely, right? Now there might also be some shenanigans possible at the base level. The thing I've seen floating around is Goldbeard, in particular in Rogue. He's a 5/5, so theoretically infinite chains are possible where you play a Goldbeard, this summons a copy of Goldbeard, the Goldbeard sees the copy and summons a copy of Goldbeard, and I don't know how exactly all that's going to resolve. I think that's actually pretty challenging still at a base level. Stuff like that probably opens up more when it comes to the mini version and like modifying the stats on the mini version, because you are, you know, potentially going to be able to change the stats of the mini version, particularly in Rogue. You can turn it into a 5/5 with the location. Then you've got sort of a 1 mana overhead on the replicator that can still maybe summon a Goldbeard. You know, it's still a 6 mana thing happening already. So there's something there. There's some kind of angle. You do have to pay that 5 up front on the first half of the replicator so they get all of this going. But I don't think usually you're going to be using the 5 cost version to do anything. But I think things get a lot more interesting with the mini version in particular. And then I think the gigantic version has some potential upside as well. So when it comes to the mini version, the real advantage here is that you're starting at 1 mana overhead. You only have to spend 1, which means you have the entire rest of the turn to do cool stuff and potentially play lots of other 1 attack things. So what are you going to do with that, right? There are a few examples, I think, of some interesting things. Like we have actually a Titan at 1 attack. Like, hey, play an Amethyst, get a second Amethyst, and start, you know, using 2 Titan abilities per turn. Like, that's pretty cool. More commonly, I think, is we're going to see minis, of course. You know, these are minis making minis. And there are actually some minis that are pretty good when summoned on board. Something like the Factory Assembly Bot mini. Remember, this is a 1/1 that still summons you a 6/7. So if you could set this up and, you know, get a 6/7 down, get a second mini making a second 6/7, that's actually just insane board for like what, 3 mana total. That's kind of nuts, but of course hard to get that first Factory Assembly Bot into play sometimes, so that's a limiter. And most other minis do have sort of battle cry effects in particular, which aren't great when summoned into play. You'd want those added to hand, not summoned into play. But there are still some examples of great minis in play getting copied. Where's this one? Yeah, Chia Drake. Right, you got Chia Drake. This has spell damage, right? I think it's going to copy the spell damage version. It says summon a copy of it, not like a base copy. So if the one you summon has spell damage, I think that the copy is going to have spell damage as well, which means like play a couple of these. That's like 4 spell damage. Maybe that's a cheesy little combo you could pull off, you know? Just get some really cheap, what is that, 3 mana total to get 4 spell damage? Like, that's kind of scary for some spell damage potential. I guess there's like owl stuff too, maybe mixed in there as well. You could still have mana left over for your Aulonius or whatever. That sounds kind of spooky. Is that going to be good or consistent? I don't know, but it's something to keep an eye on, right? Those are the sorts of cheesy lines that become possible because of cheap cards like this. So, you know, it might just be like things you run that are good. It might be, you know, minis that make sense. It might be cheese that makes sense. But I think that the mini version of Replicator here has the best upside and the highest potential, just because you don't have to spend a ton to get it rolling. Now, when we go to the 8 cost card, that's where, you know, you're spending 8 up front. You don't have any mana left to play anything behind it, so how are you going to copy any cards? Well, thankfully, since this does align with giant stat lines, we do have giants that can literally just be played for free behind your Replicator and Aider gigantic version. This is not the best example because nobody plays this giant. As a right giant, you know, this can go down to 0 and get some bonus 8/8s. I thought I had a different card pulled up, but it's not here. Where is my chained guy, the reborn guy for Death Knight? Let me pull him up real quick so we have the example. Here we go. This is the guy I wanted to showcase. Chained Guardian. This is insane, right? Like, you play your Replicator and then your Chained Guardian potentially down to 0, right? Because of all your plagues, and you just get an extra Chained Guardian summoned, right? So 2 extra 8 attack rush guys that you're able to trade in as necessary. So, you know, any sort of discount does start to open up the Replicator. Now, the question is, for those kinds of decks, do you really need all these extra 8/8s on board at that stage of the game? Are they really helping that much? Like, obviously, you know, 2 or 3 8/8s is better than 1. Like, I can do some math, but they don't always directly contribute to winning the game, because, you know, a Twisting Nether kills 3 8/8s just as easily as it kills 1, right? In other words, as you get later and later into the game, big bodies like that don't always make as significant of an impact. So is that cheese factor that's possible with the 1 cost Replicator going to be possible? I don't know. Might just be incremental value, but then there's the opportunity cost of running the Replicator itself. So can you find a deck that sort of fuses all 3 of these together and has some package that lines up with each of them? You know, I think Highlander decks are kind of the obvious example here, where you just sort of need cards to fill out the list. This is a few different bodies. It has some potential high rolls here and there. And if you have a few pieces that fit with each of these, that might be enough of an excuse to run this one. So I don't know. It doesn't jump out as me as like a card that everybody's going to be playing, because I think 2/3 of this are really hard to get upside on. And even the mini version, you still have to have the pieces necessary to make it worth it. Just not every deck's going to value this. So there is that crazy kind of weird cheese spell damage stuff possible. And I'd say some Highlander angles for this one too. All right, so moving on here, we've got some warrior cards, kicking it off with Part Scrapper, a new 2-mana spell. This one lets you lose up to 5 armor, and then your next mech costs that much less. So could actually be a way to cheat in your Replicator. I don't actually know if this is going to be right for like a mech warrior package, even though this is a mech. It might be that we saw some, like, you know, some mini stuff with mechs. There could be something there. Probably not my favorite target though. Something I would be more excited about is actually Bot Face getting cheated into play. Is this finally a chance for Bot Place to get there? Maybe you're making all these minis for your Replicator. I don't know. But a 4-cost Bot Face is actually an insane card, right? Get that down on turn 4, 4/12 taunt. It's probably going to take quite a few hits to remove it, and you're going to get, you know, 4, 6 plus minis out of it. That's actually a pretty sweet result. Now, of course, you do need 5 armor for the Part Scrapper to work, so there's this like intricate kind of balance between having a deck that can generate enough armor reliably and a deck that has enough like mech density for a kind of mechy game plan, or at least a minion based game plan. But we do have some great tools, right? Like Safety Goggles here. This allows you to gain 6 really quick. So, you know, it's like turn 4, for instance, you could play Safety Goggles and Part Scrapper all at once, and then still play, you know, something like a Fireworker here as a 0-cost 5/5, which on turn 4, 5/5 with some boom bots, not actually all that terrible of a line, right? And of course, there's lines to like coin this out on turn 1, play your Part Scrapper on turn 2, and you could be playing what, an 8-cost mech essentially on turn 3, right? Allowing you to cheat out some big stuff. So mana cheat like this is always a little bit scary. The conditionality on this is sort of tough. Not necessarily because it's hard for warrior to get 5 armor. Obviously, we know that's pretty trivial at this stage. But it's just like from a deck construction standpoint, you have to have enough ways to get 5 armor in your deck. As you're doing that, your deck starts to morph more into sort of a control deck, late game deck perhaps. instead of like a more aggressive mech kind of package. So finding some kind of hybrid build that's maybe not all in on control aspects, but has some armor gain, some mech package. It's just getting into a good spot there where you can make sure this pays off reliably enough, and you have enough good big mechs to make it worth it. But I like the idea of a big mech warrior personally. I think we could see Dr. Doom basically played, and Inventor Boom played outside of a brand deck, maybe like just get some good mechs cheated into play, slam this guy on turn 8. It's still a pretty good play even without brand, I think. So I'm intrigued to try this for sure. I think cheat cards like this always have some possibilities, because this is just a lot of potential mana cheat. The one thing I didn't talk about, I guess I should acknowledge, is that if you don't try to do this all in one turn, of course, losing your armor means you don't have access to the armor. So if you play, your safety goggles on turn 2 and like tried to play this on turn 3, but your opponent smacked you for 5, you'd lose all your armor and you'd have to start over again. So you kind of have to either hope your opponent isn't dealing damage to you early, or weave it together all at once, which could push back that payoff a little bit. But even, a turn 4, turn 5 bot face is still, I think, kind of a cool way to get bot face into play. Finally, that's exactly what that card needed. We're also going to talk about one more mech, by the way, that's big, that might be worth it to cheat into play. I don't think so, though. This is Safety Expert, a 10 mana 8/8 mech with Rush and Death Rattle. Shuffle 3 bombs into your opponent's deck, and these are not the last bombs we're going to see, because there's also the Explodoneer, a new neutral card. This one, at the end of your turn, will shuffle a bomb into your opponent's deck as well. So this one, if it stays alive, could just be bomb after bomb after bomb. There might be some fun with that. But this is also just 3 bombs, 15 potential damage. We're going to have like a shuffle garbage into your opponent's deck with Boom Boss and Safety Experts and so on. Boom Boss, I guess, could delete bombs though, so that's kind of a downside. But with Part Scrapper, this is theoretically 5. A 5-minute 8/8 rush with this Death Rattle's probably not too bad. I don't actually know that it's necessarily better than some of the other mechs though, because these bombs do often have a very delayed sort of payoff, again pushing you down a pretty late game sort of plan. And Warrior's already really good at winning late game with things like Odin and brand lines. I don't know that bombs necessarily would be a better way to do that. But, some additional mech synergies here with stuff like, Inventor Boom, again, could resummon these. Suddenly you're talking about 6 bombs, 9 bombs, and it starts to become like, what's the breakpoint here where these bombs actually become a real scary lethal threat? It's just a lot of work to put in to do that, and this card, when you're playing it for 10, I think feels really bad. So without cheats, it just looks super weak to me. Even with cheats, I don't think it's that crazy or anything. So that's not a great sign here for the Safety Expert or Bomb Warrior, but that's certainly not going to stop me from trying it, because I want to relive my glory days of duels. So last for Warrior here is the standardized pack, a 1-mana spell. Add 5 random taunt minions to your hand. At the end of your turn, discard them. And we talked about the pack a little bit in Hunter yesterday. I think this pack suffers from the same sort of problem, is just that 5 random taunt minions are not going to be very useful. Yes, this can exist as refill when you're desperate and you're out of resources. This can just turn into a turn, like you just manufacture a turn out of thin air, but it's not usually going to be a very good turn. And I think for Warrior in particular these days, they aren't hard up for good turns. They aren't hard up for resources typically either. Obviously, when you get into a late game stage when you would normally be out of resources, Warrior's doing some pretty crazy broken stuff right now. I don't see this card being better than the things Warrior can do in the late game already. I don't think they're wanting for resources or stuff to achieve. So I don't see how this works. There are, of course, some like taunty buff things happening in Warrior as well, but because these cards are getting discarded, it's hard to like do hand buff stuff to set up for, because you're going to lose most of these cards. You're not going to be able to play them out to realize the benefit of that hand buff. The one angle I will say for this, which I think is a nice little bonus in Warrior that maybe isn't as good in Hunter, because Hunter is not traditionally as late game of a deck, is that with Gaslight Gatekeeper, I always have trouble saying the name of that card, even though it got nerfed, this is still a pretty crazy 1-2 punch to kind of cheat 5 extra card draws out of your Gatekeeper, because you're adding 5 things to hand that the Gatekeeper will now swap into real cards. Spell the Gatekeeper for a reminder for everybody who's not playing much. So, this is kind of a 5-mana combo that, like, if you have like 4 or 5 cards in hand, this basically, mulligans out your original hand but also gives you 5 extra things to do. And Warrior's the kind of class that could probably afford to do that. They have a little bit more time, a little bit more late game. They're looking for specific sorts of things. I don't think this has as much benefit in Hunter, but in Warrior, I would definitely keep an eye on this as at least a possibility. Now, I don't know actually what happens to the top minions in deck. I don't know if they would lose their discard. Like, it may be true that when you draw them, they would still discard at the end of that turn, or they may just totally reset into base cards. Typically, when you're going across the zone backwards like that, you do kind of tend to reset. So they'd probably just turn into base taunt minions. So you would be kind of polluting your draw a little bit. Like, future card draws would be worse, but that would be an exchange that's worth it, because of course you're getting, you know, 5 cards now in exchange for those 5 cards you would have gotten later. So you have the resources sooner. Not to mention, you know, you're just a little bit deeper for fatigue and those sorts of things as well. If that's ever a concern, although these days in Hearthstone, rarely a concern. So that's a kind of 1-2 punch that I think makes the standardized pack a little bit more intriguing than normal. At a base level, I'm not sure I'd like this card much, but for Warrior with Gatekeeper, do keep an eye on that. Moving on over to the Exploding Ear. This is when we teased, of course. 3 mana, 2/4, end of turn, shuffle a bomb into your opponent's deck. As we know, when drawn, it explodes for 5 damage. I just don't think this is going to make enough sense, right? You're kind of passing up a lot of tempo here with the hope that this bomb somehow matters somewhere down the road, but it's unlikely to really matter, right? You need a critical mass of bombs to be worth it. This card's not like good enough at keeping up early. Like, yeah, if you kept it alive 5 or 6 turns, you'd start hitting a critical mass of bombs that become worth it because they start to draw 2 or 3 that gives you the damage break points you need. But most games are going to terminate before the bombs do their job, and you're usually only going to get 1 bomb out of this, which is just not a big enough payoff for this sort of card. Like, maybe if we get a bunch more bomb cards, you'd have to run Exploding Ear just to get, you know, that little extra bit further. But despite the long-term upside on this, that's rarely ever going to be achieved, and I think that makes this card pretty weak. Moving on to Demon Hunter here, we have the Sock Puppet Slither Spear. This is a 1 mana 1/3 Naga. This minion's attack is improved by your heroes. And yeah, I think that makes this actually a pretty spicy 1-cost card. Number 1, we've got some Naga stuff to consider. Still sometimes a relevant synergy here and there. But more importantly, this is just a really high threat really quickly compared to like the old Battle Fiend, for instance, which could get big over time as you continue to attack and attack and attack. That would scale up little by little, which is also kind of true of the old Slither Spear. You know, that would sometimes scale up a little bit more rapidly with spells, but you couldn't easily just like dump 3 attack into it on turn 2, for instance, right? It would be later in the game where you'd start to play multiple spells that would really scale up. With the Slither Spear, you can dump 3 attack into this on turn 2, right? Like, play a Burning Heart, for instance. You probably don't really want to play it on your Slither Spear, but you could if you had to, right? But just use this, give your hero 3 attack, give your Slither Spear 3 attack right away as a bonus, and you're hitting for 7 on turn 2, right? Or maybe you want to play like a Chaos Strike on curve. That's 2 bonus attack on your Slither Spear. Maybe you want to play Spirit of the Team. Again, 2 attack on your Slither Spear, quickly, you know, incrementing that. Now, the downside, of course, is you have to keep like re-upping it every turn to keep it a threat, unlike, say, like Slither Spears, although I guess you did have to re-up Slither Spears as well. Unlike, say, Battle Fiend, which, you know, kept those stats permanently. But you don't care because this is going to get cleaned up anyway. Like, it's going to go away regardless. So, you know, punching it up early on just to push some aggression, just to get that damage realized early, is absolutely going to be worth it, because you don't have to worry about it later because it's going to be dead anyway. So I don't know, I think that's pretty cool. It does mean that you have to kind of follow it up turn after turn after turn, and you have to have enough density of attack stuff to make it a threat. But I think that's not that hard for Demon Hunter to do. Worst case, your hero power is not a disaster here for the Sock Puppet. Slither Spear weapon equips also will count for the Slither Spear. So there's a lot of ways to kind of feed into this and make it a really nice early game threat for aggressive Demon Hunter decks. I will say, like, aggressive Demon Hunter decks haven't exactly gotten there lately. I know you're thinking, oh, Regis, window shopper stuff. That wasn't really about aggression, though, early, right? That was doing more mid-game stuff. Not that, like, crazy, super fast, you know. And again, I know Sharpshooter, too. But again, that's more about mid-game stuff. It's almost more mid-game setup. I mean, these, like, early, super fast curves. We haven't seen that as much for Demon Hunter lately. So maybe that's a little bit of a gap in the class right now. But this does seem like a potent tool for that possibility. Next up for Demon Hunter is the Gibbering Reject, a 4-mana 3/3. The Gibberlings are back. It's a demon this time, and after hero attacks, summon another Gibbering Reject. So potential here to create some extra 3/3s. So you like load up a weapon on turn 3, you play this on turn 4, you attack, and you basically get 2 3/3s, and God forbid your opponent leaves them around on board. You know, you can start to snowball that even further. That's kind of cool in theory, right? I don't know that like 2 3/3s on turn 4 really packs quite the punch that it used to. I think that's not that scary, and the like long-term potential of this also isn't that scary. I think these just so easily get cleaned up by various fairly cheap removal cards, rush minions, etc. that I don't think these really pose all of that much threat. So there's one cool kind of combo with going down swinging where you play rejects, and then going down swinging you attack a bunch and make a bunch of rejects. Feels like there's some kind of reference or call out there. I don't know. But it's just hard to put that together, right? Number one, like at 8 mana, I'm not sure I love that. Obviously, that seems too late. On curve, like, is this going to stick into like the follow-up, the following turn? Like coin reject, going down swing on 4. Does your opponent have enough board? There's a lot of problems to solve with that. I don't really think that saves this card. So to me, I just don't think this snowballs hard enough or fast enough. Stats aren't quite big enough, costs a little too high, whatever it is. I think that's going to make this pretty hard to work well. And finally for Demon Hunter here, we have the Return Policy 3-mana spell. Discover a friendly Death Rattle card you've played this game and trigger its Death Rattle, which, I mean, I guess the most pertinent Death Rattle that comes to mind is Umpire's Grasp. This, of course, with the Shopper Demon Hunter stuff was pretty crazy. It's intriguing, right? Because getting a second discount like that quickly, it might be worth 3 mana. You're gonna get another Umpire's Grasp added to your hand, which isn't gonna be super useful, right? Like, you don't want to have to spend another 3 to get another third chain. Plus that deck was really only running 2 anyway for your your 2 shoppers. But this could be a way to kind of try to accelerate that a little bit faster, so you don't have to do like a second grasp, for instance. I don't know though. That deck, has already of course fallen off with the nerfs, and I don't know that this is like really that good of a fit. Feels kind of clunky, and I don't know how many other payoffs you have. We've also seen the other Death Rattle Demon Hunter card played a little bit, the Ball Hog. Like, again though, this Death Rattle is probably not really advantaged for 3. Getting an extra Ball Hog in hand is not great either. It's just that most of the time Death Rattles don't feel worth a ton of mana independently, and you're spending 3 to get them, and of course you're getting a resource in hand, which can be useful, but again, you got to spend mana on it. So this just feels a little bit slow to me, but there is that tiny angle with Umpire's Grasp, or maybe this is a second quick Umpire's Grasp follow-up that does help you cheat another shopper into play pretty quickly. So that's something, but I don't know if this makes the cut in that deck. You don't actually want too many of these effects because you only have a couple shoppers, and if you get like too many of these effects going off, your deck's kind of gonna get broken because you're just gonna have these kind of dead, wasted cards in hand. So that might be the real holdback on this one. And then in other worlds, I don't know if most Death Rattles are actually worth it, though. There could be some like crazy giant 10-cost Death Rattle that comes out, and 3 mana feels like a steal or a bargain. That suddenly this makes more sense. Speaking of big Death Rattles that are going to pay off, no, not this one. It's not this one. This is the last card of this video. Building Block Golem, a 5-mana 6/3 with Rush and Death Rattle. Summon 3 random 1-cost minions. That's not going to be the reason to play your Demon Hunter card. But this is an okay neutral card. Probably the sort of thing that's great in Arena. The fact that it has Rush 6/3, that can take a nice little trade on board. You're left behind with some stuff. The real problem, of course, is that random 1 costs are going to be pretty bad on average. You're gonna get some 1/1s, some 2/2s, some random 1/3s with effects that are hard to utilize, those sorts of things. So it's not worth much. You could maybe try to envision this in some sort of like wide board token deck that just needs wide boards and has buffs to utilize and stuff. But I think in most cases, you're just gonna have better cards to fill those slots. You just won't need to fall back on this sort of thing. So cool little card to exist in random pools and Arena, etc. Neutral cards could do worse than this, but just not a card that sees competitive play. So that said, let's do some star ratings for these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Replicator Inator is a 3-star card. Heart Scrapper is a 4-star card. Safety Expert is a 2-star card. Standardized Pack is a 3-star card. Explodeneer is a 2-star card. Sock Puppet Slither Spear is a 4-star card. Gibbering Reject is a 2-star card. Return Policy is a 3-star card. Building Block Golem is a 2-star card. And there you go. That's part 3, I think, of our mini set card review. I think only a couple days left, but some intriguing stuff here, man. I got some fun ideas out of these. I'm not like, you know, amazed at the power level of most of these cards so far, but I think there's some cool ideas, some fun things to do, so that's worth something. We'll have some fun decks to play for sure. But share your thoughts on these. Think anything's going to be absolutely nuts? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.